Hey there, this is Derek Murphy. I wanted to make another video about my editing process. I'm actually kind of excited because now is the 25th. I've had a book out on pre-order, which is the third book in my series, which is going live in like 3 days. So I have to actually upload this document in like 48 hours or something. So I've been very stressed about this book. I've been working on it all week. I probably spent about 6 hours working on it today, and I'm going to kind of talk you through where I am now. So this probably isn't the type of video where I tell you what you should do because I don't think I have the healthiest writing process. I'm definitely a procrastinator. And writing up like this to the deadline is not a good idea. I recommend, finishing a clean rough draft and then scheduling your pre-order to go out, about a month in advance or 2 weeks in advance at least so that you can go through several proper rounds of editing and proofreading. I'm probably not going to have time for that with this release. But I did start a series about my 3 stages of editing. I think I have another video on YouTube that's just, quickly walks you through my 3 stages, which is what, how, and why. But I also had made a video probably like a month ago when I was working on this book after NaNoWriMo, where I talked about step one, which is the what. So that's the first time you go through, all the way through, like after you finish a rough draft, you go through your book again, one full revision, and you just delete all the crap and you actually finish fleshing in the scene. So actually, technically, I've only done this one. After I finished this rough draft, I actually skipped a lot of scenes in NaNoWriMo. So the last few weeks, I've been going through and filling in a lot of the scenes that I skipped, that I didn't even write. So I kind of have just now finished my rough draft, which is way too late because I'm publishing in a few days. However, because a lot of this has been written already, I also did a lot of the how stuff in this revision. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. I'll just bold this. And in the how scene, you would be concerned with how does things actually go together. The what is what happens. It's just like the action scenes, putting the things in the right places. The how is like, what does it look like? What are the physical mechanics? How do they get around from place to place? It also, to some extent, is about the lens, like where you choose to enter and end your scenes, the decisions you're making about breaking up your chapters. I had like big blocks of text that I hadn't divided into chapters, so you have to kind of decide, where to break your scenes. Most of my chapters have a scene break in the middle, so it's like two main scenes, and then I have to decide where the characters are, how they get into the scene, how do they get out of the scene. You want to cut a lot of the transitions as much as possible and just start in the action. And I like to end on a cliffhanger or a hook on the end of every scene or the end of every chapter, especially. So I did a lot of that stuff. It's also the place to try to keep track of some details, like, if they were holding a weapon here, or for example, towards the end of the book, I want one of the characters to pull out a cell phone, but they fell off a raft in the Nile River. So, how did they get the cell phone? And I have to go back and write a scene where one of the characters brings a cell phone, like a waterproof cell phone case, because otherwise that scene wouldn't make any sense. Or for example, I have a lot of battle scenes, but they fly to Egypt and then they get arrested. So do they have their weapons? Are they walking around with swords? What kind of weapons do they have and where do they get them from? That's the kind of stuff. Like, how do the mechanics all work together? What are the logistics of the scenes that you want to show? So that's kind of what I've been working on. And also I was still kind of just trying to flesh out, getting to the end. I had some really rough notes, or I had some like a lot of like, this happens here, but I didn't actually write the scene. So I had to go back and finish. And I've gotten to the point now, after working all day, where I have kind of finished the book. And it's still super messy, and it's not the ending that I thought that I would get towards. But I'm also really happy with how it's going to end up. So I kind of want to show you what it looks like. And then I'll make one more editing scene in a couple days when I actually go through and clean it up for real. So at the beginning, like all of this stuff in the beginning is still just a lot of notes. I have like my original, these are my twists and reveals. I have my original plot points that I like to have. It's kind of like an 8-step plot point that I use. If you haven't read the plot dot guide yet, I recommend checking that out. But then I also went through and broke up all my chapters. And some of these I added in like a chapter break, and then 3 more chapter breaks. So I actually have to go through and number these now that I've actually decided where my chapter breaks happen. I like to measure my chapters and try to keep them sort of the same length. They tend to be between 2,000 and 3,000 words in a chapter, so hopefully I get in that range. As I'm going through, I also do this where I add a little star up here by my title headings. This is the navigation pane in Microsoft Word. So as long as you highlight and choose heading 1, I haven't styled this at all or designed it, so that's something else I need to do the formatting before, but the formatting will go pretty quick because I've been using these styles for my chapter breaks. So this is also just going to be, you don't have to add a table of contents in Microsoft Word before you convert to EPUB or Mobi, because it'll take the navigation pane and automatically add that in. Ebooks use a separate navigation that automatically generates from the title tags of the headers. But I've added this little star. That's how I kind of mark my progress. So once I have all these chapters in the navigation pane, I will go through. And actually, I just finished this chapter, so I'm going to move my star to the epilogue, which I haven't written yet. And you'll see there's also still tons of research notes. I have a whole section down here on extra history. I have other chapters. I actually have probably, like, there were 3 or 4 extra chapters. There's a whole different final battle scene that I didn't get to in this book. And so I was really worried about it, 5 or 6 days ago when I was definitely running out of time because I didn't have time to write all these extra chapters. But you can also see that so far I already have 87,000 words. And this particular series is, the other 2 books in the series are only like 65,000 words. So I can definitely get away with breaking it at a shorter point. And I just ended it sooner than I had planned to. So I'm going to trim a lot of this extra stuff and get down closer to about 65,000 words, which is also kind of nice because that means I've got a strong start on the 4th book, which will be the final book in the series. And I have a lot of content and material that I don't have to squeeze into this book. I can really extend it out and make it good for the other book, which means it's going to be a lot faster for me to actually finish the series and get that 4th book done. And if I scroll past this last section of extra notes, which is quite a bit, and I get to this part, this is the last scene that I just finished writing. So it needs some editing. It's not perfectly clean, but it's pretty good and I'm really excited about it. Basically ends with she's in a tower. Zeus sends a lightning bolt and destroys the tower and she falls into the sea. This is a really gripping final battle scene. So it's fine to end. Like, it doesn't quite fit my plot dot formula. I'd like to kind of have a wrap up, and I tend to do this in longer books. I wrote epilogue here, but I don't actually like having an epilogue, or I don't think it's necessary to have an epilogue, and I wouldn't necessarily call it an epilogue. I'd probably just call it, I might just rename it chapter or whatever and make it a new chapter. And if you're writing a series with a lot of action that ends on a cliffhanger, I don't think it's necessary to add an epilogue. It's kind of nice. I mean, readers kind of like it. I don't think it's necessary. So I could just clean it up and I could just end it here, which is like, she tumbles towards the sea. It's a big cliffhanger. And that's fine. It would be an okay ending. Readers will hate it a little bit, but as long as I have the next book out pretty quickly, they won't mind so much. However, there's one big, super big twist. I think I've talked about recently in some of my other videos a lot of the setup for this particular book. This is actually a problem I had in the second book because I did a lot of setup and I always felt like there was one final scene that I didn't finish writing in the second book of this series. And so I kind of told people, like at the end of the book, I told people, sign up to my email list and you'll get this missing chapter, which was a mistake because a lot of people are expecting, the ending, the chapter. If I just told them that was the end, it would have been fine. But because I said this isn't the end, there's another chapter that's coming soon, and I didn't give it to them, that was kind of a problem. But the second book actually kind of ends on this kind of a cliffhanger where there's a big final battle scene. Her childhood home is totally destroyed. She stabs Zeus in the groin with this magical weapon, and that's just the end. And I meant to have another scene that's kind of like an epilogue where they go back to their home base and then there's one final twist where something big happens. And I didn't finish that, and that was a problem because I didn't really know like how to start this third book. This is my first ever third book, by the way, so it's the first time I'm finishing a trilogy, and we'll actually have a fourth book, but this is the furthest I've gotten in a series, which is really exciting. But I never really finished that final chapter that I had wanted to put at the end of book 2. So instead, that's now the first chapter of this book, which isn't quite the way that I had planned it, but it's still a pretty strong chapter 1. It starts right in the middle of the action where they're returning home after that last battle scene. And then they get home, and then there's one final big twist that happens. I kind of would have liked to have that at the end of book 2, but it's fine this way. But I'd still like to do it here. So there's one big twist that I've been setting up, basically the whole novel with all this backstory, and I don't want to leave it to the next book because it just won't be as powerful if it comes. If people read this and then months later it starts off with that other book, it won't have the same effect. And it's a really brutal, powerful twist. So I want to put it at the end of this book, which is why I'm really going to push forward and try to write this epilogue or the final chapter. It'll probably be brief, but that's what I'm going to be working on over the next day or two. It'll probably just take me a couple hours to write. I've got probably half of it written already, so I just have to move some things around. And then I'll start actually... Well, I'll go back and I'll start with the editing, the third portion. So the third step of this, once I write that final epilogue or the last chapter or whatever, and I've really got it done the way I want it to be done, then I'll just start going through one final pass, which will be a final proofreading. And that's where I'll also focus on the character motivation and the deeper meaning behind everything. So I've got all these history notes. I've got some other stories that I really want to put in. I kind of have to focus on, why does this stuff happen? Why does it matter to the characters? Why are they emotionally invested in it? Why do they do the things that they do? I have to make sure I present all of that really strongly, and it's balanced. So I talked in another video recently about the 3 kinds of conflict that you need to have in your novel, because I had written a really gripping, emotionally tense scene where nothing actually happens. There's no battles or conflicts or fighting, but it's still one of the strongest chapters in this novel because of all the different levels and layers of tension and conflict happening between the characters. And it really kind of sets, like, before I go into the final battle scene, I kind of remind readers what's at stake, what's the risk, what can they possibly lose, also the emotional stakes and the character sympathy. So like before all these big action scenes, before all the explosions and the fighting and swordplay and stuff, I have to make readers care about what happens to my characters. So I have to have some slow scenes where there's some more sympathy. I had one of my characters get shot. I had some other one take care of her. There's a lot of extra stuff I added to the last chapter even that really boosts the emotional appeal, because they're all kind of making sacrifices for each other. And so at the end of the book, I have this, like, I've done this pretty well. I still have to clean up, especially the last, most of the book is super clean already, but the last few chapters, because I just kind of went through them again, are probably pretty rough. Some of the scenes I have just written for the first time, so they definitely need more proofreading, but I'll go through and fix the why. I'll tuck in some of the history and some of the notes that I put in. There's definitely a lot of details. I've put a lot of comments throughout the book, and a lot of the comments say things like, fix this scene, or write it better, or make something. Like, I noticed that I didn't have a particularly strong paragraph or sentence, and that it's weak, and I need to actually go back and fix it a little bit. So I'll just kind of, like, once I've cleaned it up, I'll go through and I'll fix all those comments and notes. I'll fix a little bit more, like if they're really wearing the clothes that I want them to be wearing. Not everybody thinks about this, but in the plot dot, it's really about writing visually. So thinking about your scenes in terms of how does it look like if you were going to paint it in terms of the color contrast and the shapes and the symbols that you're using in the scene and all these other things. I like to think about those things. So I want to make sure my scenes are as visually compelling as possible. But they basically just survive with their lives and flee from Zeus's huge army. They've been on this quest in Egypt to find some magical stuff, and they fail basically, and now they're running home. At least they've all survived, they think. But then in the final chapter, like I said, there's going to be this one massive twist that's really shocking and brutal at the end of this book. And then it also sets the next book up really well because they're not just, starting off again in their home base. They're starting off with all of this anger and depression and frustration and violence. Even though they're all friends and allies, there's going to be all of this built up emotional tension because of what happened at the end of this book. So ideally by this point, like when I go through it for the last time, I'll have to delete all of these extra notes or scenes. I'll have to move all of this like extra content to a new document, which is going to be the beginning of book 4. Now it's kind of nice because like I said, I have a really strong start on book 4, and I may be able to get it out early this year. And then before I upload the document, I've installed Grammarly and ProWriting Aid in Microsoft Word, and I haven't really used these two tools before. You should at least always use Microsoft Word's basic grammar and spelling check. Even though it's tedious, it will fix a lot of things. And even though I'm a pretty good proofreader, when you go through your own work, it's hard to see everything, and you're probably going to miss a lot of stuff. Ideally, I have a pretty big team of beta readers, so if I was able to procrastinate less, if I was able to fix my writing style a little bit, I would leave myself more space, and I would get a rough draft copy. Well, not even a rough draft. I'd get a clean manuscript to my beta readers a few weeks before the actual launch date or the deadline date, because of course there's going to be some extra typos and mistakes that you don't want. Like your hardcore fans, they'll probably overlook a few things if they really like your writing. But if you're getting strangers to pay for your book and there's a bunch of typos and spelling mistakes, you're going to earn negative reviews immediately. And even though like I'll usually publish it, my beta readers will tell me the mistakes and I'll upload a new draft in a couple weeks. If in that time strangers who don't know me, or even some of my readers, if they're annoyed by having, they don't think it's professional having too many typos and mistakes, which it really isn't, they might leave some comments to that effect, which never really go away, because even after you fix it and you upload a clean copy, and I usually will do that and then start working on the paperback, a few weeks after the ebook is out, and I really know that I've gotten all of the mistakes weeded out. Those initial first reviews that mention grammar and spelling mistakes never go away, even if you've cleaned the manuscript and uploaded a new copy. So of course that's a big drawback with my entire writing process that I'm personally working on and trying to fix so that I can plan and give myself more time. However, this time, because I really don't have enough time to send this out to beta readers, I'm going to go through Grammarly and ProWriting Aid's plugins, and I'll also try their online tools. And I'll also make a video about a comparison, how well does Grammarly compare with ProWriting Aid? Do I think they're worth buying, or how they helped me to clean up my book? I really don't have very much time, and I know it looks like a complete mess right now, but I'm also pretty confident. I basically just have to delete a lot of stuff and run it through Grammarly and ProWriting Aid a couple times, and then write that final scene, and the book will be done. And I'm happy with this book. I think it's really good. I think readers are really going to like it, even though they might hate me for the twisted cliffhanger in that final scene. But I am excited to get it done, because this will be the first novel that I've published in a long time, in like 6 or 7 months. I only finished one novel in 2018, and now I'm at the beginning of 2019. It's January. I'm hoping to put out a lot more content this year and really focus on my fiction. So I'm excited to get this one done and closed, published, and move on to the next project.